sit over here?
Read called Chicago City on the Make. Look around you, my friends, for today we see the legacy of some of the giants of Chicago's architecture. Visionaries, they wrote their stories in stone and steel. And I, myself, have been telling their stories on these shoreline boats myself for 22 years. Date down, it will be on your test. That was the date of the Great Chicago Fire. On that day of fire, supposedly started, me boyos, by days, and now don't you know, Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a kerosene lantern, boyos, causing a fire that took out a third of the city. But the silver lining behind that smoky cloud was the I will spirit of Chicago. For we bounced back from the Great Fire and rebuilt the city and invented the skyscraper in the process. And then in 1893, to show the city off, we host the Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair. Architect Daniel Burnham, who said, make no small plans, aim high in your hopes, made a big plan called the Plan of Chicago. After the World's Fair city he created to house all the exhibits, he had some ideas about how you would build a city. The Plan of Chicago of 1909 made the river, like the great cities around the world, the focal point of the city. We literally willed modern Chicago into existence. Now, I love that Chicago is a living museum of history. I'm going to show you what the World's Fair looked like right now. The buildings looked like the clock tower of the one and only Wrigley Building. 1921, commissioned by Chewing Gum King William Wrigley Jr., who was a young man, was selling juicy fruit gum for the first time at our Columbian Exposition World's Fair. He brings the fair home. It is called revivalism. In that style, you go back to Greece, Rome. Classic architecture uplifts the soul. Spanish revival for the clock tower itself, modeled on the 11th century Giralda Tower in Sevilla in Spain. Now we approach our Grand Boulevard, Michigan Avenue. Hold on to your wallets. You want to go shopping and buy everything in sight on the Magnificent Mile. That's your shopping district 1 mile north of the Wrigley Building. Did you know we call Michigan Avenue in the French manner Pour le Mich? Boulevard Mich. It was inspired by the wide boulevards of Paris, France. Indeed, Daniel Burnham, with a plan of Chicago, was hoping Chicago would become known as Paris on the Prairie. Let's take it to the bridge. What happened to the bridge? The bridge we named DuSable Bridge. We honor our first permanent resident, the French-speaking fur trader from Haiti, Jean-Baptiste Pont-du-Sable, started a fur trading empire right there in 1779. You can take a photo with a bust of Mr. DuSable east of Michigan Avenue later today. Look how the World's Fair influence lives on in the beauty that is the Jewelers Building, 45 degrees to your left. You see that beautiful building with cupola dome and the water tanks, inspired by a 15th century Italian monastery, the Certosa de Pavia, but built here for the diamond trade. Movie fans right remember in the film Batman Begins, the Caped Crusader sitting up there, surveying his domain, Gotham City, which Chicago served for in that film. Now, coming up on our right, what is currently the second tallest building in Chicago, looms Trump International Hotel and Tower. Adrian Smith Architects, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, 2009. The Trump Building introduces us to what I will call contextualism. Architecture does not happen in a vacuum. You want to be site-specific. You want to embrace your area. So, when we see the Trump Building, notice how it has patios. You see the cutaways. Everywhere there's a cutaway that's actually corresponding to the height of a neighboring building. You don't want to overtake the neighborhood. You want to segue in and be a part of it. Now, the black box coming up on the right is AMA Plaza 1971. It was done by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, father of modernism in America. Modernism is probably the style most people are familiar with. Our modern cities are full of boxes. Now, modernism, when I say modernism, think of it this way. Modernism was born at the Bauhaus, who was heard as this famous art school in 1920s Germany. The Bauhaus was mixing art and architecture. They were utilitarian and they were functional. They would say things like, the brick is another teacher. Now the Bauhaus modernists, they celebrate structural materials, but no decoration on the building, no frilly ornamentation. To the modernists, that would be bourgeois, dishonest. Instead, look at the building. You strip your building down to 3 elements: skeleton, skin, space. That's all you really need. Skeleton is your frame, skin is your glass curtain wall. Space is a square, 90% of the time. Mies van der Rohe, who did that building, would often say less is more. Now, check this out. There was a rebel in the modern crowd studying at the Bauhaus. Bertram Goldberg never did like boxes. A student at the Bauhaus, he did the Marina City Towers in the early 60s, giving them the nickname, as we call them yet today, the Corncob Towers. Now, Bertrand Goldberg had partnered with the Janitors Union to do affordable living downtown, because you know what? People who work in all these buildings, they don't want to commute. They wanted to live downtown. But there was no Riverwalk. This was an industrial wasteland, so this is a complete city. Everything's at your fingertips. 4 restaurants, bowling alley, swimming pool, bike. Look at that space-age parking. Now, I want to give you a tip if you live at Marina City. Do not, I repeat, do not try to park your own car. Let the parking attendants do that. If you back up too much, you end up in the river. It is not pretty. 55 West Wacker Drive is a subset of modernism. Specifically, we would call this style brutalism. From the French phrase béton brut, or raw concrete, the brutalists were modernists who seemed to have taken too many steroids. They are the Incredible Hulk of the architectural world. Yes, they celebrate structure, go overboard. Brutalism wanted to give an institution a sense of gravitas. Have you seen that style? I bet you have. Civic buildings, university campuses often favor it. Now step back to 1913. The old Reed Murdoch Center warehouse is thriving today as an industrial-sized restaurant called River Roast. I want you to notice something. The building is much more horizontal than vertical. Did you catch that? And that is because the architect George Niemans was like the great Frank Lloyd Wright. Who's heard that name? Out of Chicago and out of Oak Park. Frank Lloyd Wright was the father of the style we call Prairie School. Prairie School architects evoke our flat Midwestern landscape. We don't have any mountains here. So like the flatness of the plains, the buildings hug the horizon. Now, my friends, I made a big claim at the top of the tour that Chicago invented the skyscraper. This is how it happened. After that fire in 1871, by ordinance, you were not allowed to build with wood anymore in Chicago, leaving you with brick masonry. But if you depend on load-bearing brick wall for support, every time you add a new floor, your base wall will have to get 6 inches wider to support it. You've lost all your floor space. So in 1885, a Civil War bridge builder named William LeBaron Jenney introduced to Chicago the iron and steel grid frame, or skeleton, like every modern skyscraper supported with today. That led to what you see right to your right, the Chicago School, 1885 to 1910. There's your first skyscrapers. The major change from a load-bearing wall holding up the building to a skeleton. Once you're liberated from the wall, windows got really big to let in natural light, and would even be known as a Chicago window in the building trade. Now on our right, the style that put the roar in the roaring 20s, Art Deco, the 1930 Chicago Merchandise Mart. Art Deco is a rather streamlined, angular, massive style, came out of Paris, France, 1925. You know, whenever I say the word Art Deco, I become Art Deco. I'm a hood ornament on a car from the 30s. When I say Art Deco, you can think the Great Gatsby, the Jazz Age. Because America in the 1920s was a period of unbridled optimism and prosperity. The country seemed to be moving forward without end. The sleek look of Art Deco reflected that. The Merchandise Mart would be the largest structure in America prior to completion of the Pentagon. 4,600 windows, 7 miles of hallways. It had its own zip code. Building on the way back. Right now, eyes up, cameras at the ready, prepare to be amazed. Welcome to Wolf Point. The confluence of the 3 branches of the river, from east that we're on, north branch, right, south branch, left, is a showplace for great architecture today. And the building that started it all is the building with a curve on our left, the new V in the building, 333 West Wacker Drive. A prime example of contextualism once again. Everything is relative, my friends. Everything relates to the river. Beautiful building. It set the bar pretty high back in 1983. It said, yo, you want to build around me in the future? You better bring your A game. You better do your best. And everyone has in the last 5 years. From the Wolf Point Tower projects on my right, California friends, Wolf Point South, already named Salesforce. And in front of us, the building with the red sculpture by the great Spanish architect, Santiago Calatrava, is River Point. An arch at the bottom is complemented with an inverted parabola at the roof. Look at the whole building. You know who really gets this building? Little kids. They have nicknamed it the Hot Pocket Sandwich Building because it actually looks like the microwave heating sleeve for that rather popular American pastry. I didn't make that up. Kids came up with that. That was brilliant, though, because when you give a building a nickname, your brain is working. You take an image from your common experience and you apply it to the shape you're learning about. So let's look at the building that looks like a mechanical pencil next, 150 North Riverside. Why would you make a building come to a point? Because you're constricted. You've got railroad tracks west, the river in the east, and you only have a 2-acre footprint. So nobody touched this lot for 30 years. It's kind of challenging, right? Because the railroads don't own the land. We gave the railroads that land so we would be the railroad hub. If you build, therefore, you must rent the air from the railroad and stay out of the way. Getjen Partners, who did this 2017 building, said we can take this challenge for the Riverwalk. We will give you a building inside of a park. They're only using 20% of the base. Catch this photo. The ghost image of our own ship. Cantilever 8 floors in, then they go to 54. It's their core posts holding the building up. They're called caissons. Watertight, box-like structures you fill with concrete. And because this Great Lakes area in Chicago, you know, we were carved out by glaciers. The soil is really, really soft. So they literally had to drill 110 feet down. That's when they hit bedrock, something solid to anchor that building. Now we have wondrous Art Deco again around us. Look on our right, the Chicago Daily News building was nicknamed the Great Chicago Sphinx. Art Deco shows up in the 1920s, the same time period when they first explored King Tutankhamun's tomb. The Sphinx would have been a meme in people's mind back then, hence the nickname. And on our left, the Civic Opera Building, Art Deco 1928. I would call this a perfect marriage of pragmatism and art. You start with an opera house, but let's be practical. Surround yourself with corporate towers, and that way you always have a form of revenue still coming in. Now, after the Art Deco period ends in around 1930, what happens in architecture in America? Nothing, nada, zip, zilch, zero for 25 years because of the Great Depression followed by World War II. After the war, the Bauhaus architects of Germany come into their own. The directors all end up over in the States. Mies van der Rohe, father of modernism, came to Chicago from Bauhaus in 1938, spreading modernism around the globe from the Illinois Institute of Technology. So by the 60s, look on your right, welcome to the Mad Men advertising age. Modernism is the order of the day at Gateway Center, an air rights project surrounding our Union Station. The 4 major buildings, look at that, 2 black boxes, 1 white, 1 mirrored, are literally the evolution of modern architecture over 30 years. This is a time machine. Join me in the time machine right now. Superman or Green Lantern, ain't got nothing on me. A song by the singer Donovan from the year 1967. The same year is this black box building, which we would call modernism. I can call this building Miesian. Mies van der Rohe is so known for the style. His name is an adjective to describe it. Now let's see a slight change as we enter the decade of the 1970s. Well, there's a port on a western bay. Hey, it's the 70s, friends. And that means international style. Look at the white building. Now here's a bet. Anywhere you live on the entire planet Earth, I bet you might know an office building just like that white building. Because the goal of the international style is like, whoa, the future's moving too fast, man. We don't know what business is need. We got to be neutral. We got to build one box, no historic precedent, so we can put the same office building in any city, in any country. You see the building with the red block? We tour guides hardly ever talked about this building. It did not excite us. So I think the owner sat down one morning and said, we must get on the tour guide's map. How can we get the tour guides to talk about us? How can we get on the map? I have an idea. Let's put ourselves on the map. So they spent $800,000 and they had a navigational map of the river imprinted on their building. Look at their red blocks, say the 3 map words with me. You are here. That's the building. This is the south branch of the river along the painting. This is the building. This is the real south branch of the river. Isn't that better than GPS? Now coming up on our right, friends, is the former Chicago Central Post Office, thriving today, reimagined as a new business center. This is what we would call adaptive reuse. There are probably 1,000 or many more than that buildings around the world, structurally sound, waiting for a second chance at life. You don't always have to start from scratch. So the old post office was built in 1921, 2.7 million square feet, largest post office on earth back then, booyah. As the mail order catalog business was invented in Chicago by A. Montgomery Ward, the catalog king followed by Sears and Roebuck. But elevators tended to slow down the mail. The post office moved out over 20 years ago. The building life following alone until a New York City firm, 601 West Coast, showed up. I did my homework. 601 West of New York City developed the entire west side of Manhattan. This told me they had a track record, and when they came to town, They immediately secured Walgreens corporate as an anchor tenant, followed by Uber Freight and Pepsi Cola. And to top it off, they built miniature paddleball tennis courts for their employees on the roof and planted. Oh, he admitted in an interview during the World's Fair of 1893 that it was a made-up story. It was too late. The legend refused to die. And every year on the anniversary of the fire, October 8th, kids would march to the O'Leary barn and start throwing rocks. Better late than never. Well over 100 years after the events of that fire, City Council of Chicago met and they said, okay, enough with the cow story. They invited historians to come forward, and the historians actually proved that Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were sleeping that Sunday night at 9 p.m. when the fire started, and you should look instead at the O'Leary's neighbor. He was a shady guy by the name of, wait for it, Peg Leg Sullivan. Now, Peg Leg Sullivan is the man who reported the Great Chicago Fire, and this theory put forth this question: what is old Peg Leg doing snooping around his neighbors, the O'Leary's barn, in the middle of the night, looking for a bit of cerveza? The man's trying to steal the O'Leary's beer. They now believe he started a small fire to cover up his own beer-stealing crime. He got a bit out of control. At any rate, Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were finally exonerated of all guilt. I must say, huzzah! Huzzah! Hooray for cows. Welcome to Chicago.